AI safety. It's one of those things, right? Everyone's talking about it, but are we really going beneath the surface?
Yeah, it's easy to get caught up in the hype.
Exactly. So today we're doing a deep dive into OpenAI's approach to AI safety. We've got their safety brief pulled up, and let me tell you, it's a fascinating read.
Oh, absolutely. It's way more than just, don't worry, be happy. They're really grappling with some complex stuff.
Right. It's not just lip service. So one of the first things that jumped out to me was this idea of a multi-layered approach to safety. They start with model training.
Which is fundamental, of course.
Totally. It's like if you're baking a cake, you need the right ingredients from the get-go, right?
Exactly. You
Yeah.
can't just frost over a bad cake.
Aha, exactly. So they're trying to bake in human values and policies right into the AI's core. But then on top of that, they've got these system-level guardrails.
It's like that extra layer of protection,
Yeah.
right?
Think of them as like automated bouncers at the AI club.
I like that, making sure things don't get out of hand.
Right. So even if the AI tries to step out of line, these guardrails are there to keep things in check.
And that's so important because let's be real, we can't just rely on the AI always playing by the rules.
And this is where it gets even trickier because how do you even define what's harmful when it comes to AI?
Yeah, it's a bit of a moving target, isn't it?
Totally. It's not always black and white. And OpenAI specifically talks about their work on child safety, which, let's be honest, is a whole other beast.
Absolutely. The stakes are incredibly high when it comes to protecting children online.
For sure. And they're actually collaborating with other big tech companies on this, right?
They are. They're working to proactively filter out things like child sexual abuse material. It's a tough reality, but they're tackling it head on.
It's good to know they're not shying away from the tough stuff.
No, not at all. And what I find encouraging is that they acknowledge it's not a one-and-done kind of deal. They're committed to constantly monitoring and adapting as new threats emerge.
So it's an ongoing process.
Exactly. And that's the only way to stay ahead of the curve in this rapidly evolving landscape.
So they've got all these safety measures in place, but how do they actually make sure they work? It's like you can have the best security system in the world, but if you never test it...
You're right. It's not really secure then, is it?
Exactly.
Yeah.
And this is where OpenAI's red teaming comes in.
Ah, yes, the ethical hackers of the AI world. I love it.
Right. Basically, they bring in these external experts whose sole job is to try and break the AI, find its weaknesses,
And what's really interesting is they actually share some examples of this in the brief. Like, one red team figured out how to make an earlier version of their language model generate biased content.
Oh, wow, really? How'd they do that?
They found a sneaky workaround in the system, basically exploiting a blind spot in the AI's training. And this kind of testing is so valuable because it exposes those vulnerabilities that you might not catch in a lab setting.
Right, because out in the real world, people aren't always going to play by the rules.
Exactly. And the stakes are so much higher with AI. We're not just talking about a computer crashing. We're talking about potential real-world harm.
And OpenAI gets that, which is why they're not just looking for any vulnerabilities. They're laser-focused on catastrophic risks.
Right, those what if the worst happens scenarios.
Exactly. They even have this whole preparedness framework dedicated to it. And get this, they're looking at things like cybersecurity threats, bioweapons, even nuclear risks.
Now, those are some scary what-ifs.
I know, right? It's like something out of a sci-fi movie, but they're taking it seriously. But okay, so they're building these safeguards. They've got the red team poking holes. What happens then? Do they just release the AI and hope for the best?
Oh, absolutely not. That's where iterative deployment comes in. They roll out access in stages, starting small with alpha and beta testing. It's a much more cautious approach.
So they're like dipping their toes in the water first instead of diving head first.
Precisely. They're closely monitoring how the AI behaves in real-world situations, gathering data, making tweaks along the way. It's a process of constant refinement.
Which makes sense, right? Because with something as powerful as AI, you don't want to rush into things.
Definitely not. It's all about finding that balance between progress and responsibility. And that takes time and careful consideration.
Okay, we've talked about the multi-layered approach, the red teaming, the iterative deployment, but what about those AI risks that aren't so obvious, the ones that kind of sneak up on you?
Right, like those unexpected challenges that pop up.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
And one that OpenAI seems particularly concerned about is deepfakes.
Deepfakes, yeah. Those are still a big concern.
Because it's not just about a funny video going viral, right?
No, not at all. We're talking about potential for real harm here. Political manipulation, fraud,
Yeah.
damage to someone's reputation.
It's like seeing is no longer believing.
That's it. It undermines trust in a really fundamental way.
Exactly. So how is OpenAI addressing this? What are they doing about it?
Well, one interesting thing they're focusing on is provenance. They're trying to ensure that you can always trace AI-generated content back to a reliable source.
So, like, how do they actually do that?
For example, with ChatGPT, they only use pre-recorded, verified human voices. That way there's a clear record of where the audio came from.
Oh, that's smart. It's like a digital watermark almost.
Yeah.
Exactly. It adds a layer of authenticity and accountability.
Okay, that makes sense. But even with all these precautions in place, AI can still slip up sometimes, right?
Of course. AI systems are complex. They're bound to make mistakes. It's not a perfect science.
So what happens then?
Well, that's why OpenAI developed CriticGPT.
Critic GPT, what's that?
Think of it like ChatGPT's inner critic. It's trained using the same RLHF method, but instead of generating text, it analyzes ChatGPT's output for errors.
So it's like a built-in editor or fact checker.
Yeah, that's a good way to put it. It's
Yeah.
looking for inconsistencies, biases, things like that.
That's actually really clever. So they're basically pitting two AIs against each other.
In a way, yes. It's a way to leverage AI's strengths to address its weaknesses.
I like it. But even with Critic GPT, it's still a work in progress, right?
Right. It's not a silver bullet. It still has its limitations. For example, it struggles with more complex arguments or really subtle errors.
It just goes to show, even with all the advancements, AI safety is an ongoing challenge. It's not something you can just solve and be done with it.
It definitely keeps you on your toes, that's for sure.
It really does. It makes you think about the big picture too, you know?
Yeah.
Like, as AI gets more powerful, how do we make sure it stays aligned with our values?
That's the million-dollar question, isn't it?
Yeah.
And it's one that we all need to be thinking about, not just the folks at OpenAI.
Absolutely. So, for everyone listening, keep asking those questions, stay informed, be curious, and let's all work together to navigate this brave new world of AI, because this conversation is far from over.